Hey everyone, I'm Mark DeSalvo, and today I want to talk to you about a topic that is near and dear to all wrestlers, and that is their shoulder health. Now, why is shoulder health so important, besides the obvious fact that if you don't have injured shoulders, you can actually stay on the mats? Well, if you have mobile, strong shoulders, you're far less likely to miss time on the mats. You're way more likely to be able to execute your techniques, and you're just going to perform better overall. I think one of the biggest mistakes that wrestlers have when it comes to training their shoulders is they think too literally about just the shoulder itself. In reality, this is a byproduct of so many other factors that need to be in order before you can actually expect your shoulders to look, feel, and perform well. So today, we're going to get into all of those factors so you can ace it on the mats. When it comes to training your shoulders, you usually want to start around it to make sure everything is working properly. And the best place to start is to make sure your scapula, or that large wingy bone on your back with your shoulder blades, can function properly. Now, your scapula in general has 6 main functions with a few other honorable mentions. So the best thing to do is to make sure that each of those 6 functions is working correctly. And if something in one of those 6 is not working, then that's probably where you should start. So we're going to start with elevation and depression. Elevation is literally raising up your shoulder blades or your shoulders towards your ears, and depression is literally moving it away from them. Now, if you struggle to do either one of those, that's usually where you should start. It's also not unusual for a lot of wrestlers to have problems with elevation or depression. A lot of times if you're trying to hide or defend your neck, you're usually overly elevating all the time, so depression might be very difficult for you. Alternatively, sometimes people who are constantly lifting heavy weights in a deadlifting type motion, for instance, or someone has to carry something, might find that they have a really easy time with depressing their shoulders, but not as easy of a time elevating them. One reason you want to make sure that your shoulders can elevate properly is so you can execute a single leg takedown or really off balance someone when you have a single leg. So with Bianca here, if I was to scoop up her leg like this, the moment I am able to elevate, or even just to get her leg off the ground, that is all shoulder elevation. The next function of the scapula that is often very difficult for people is retraction of the scapula. That literally means to pull the shoulder blades back or away from your spine. Literally every combat sport requires people to roll their shoulders forward and protect their neck, make themselves small, protect their head. All of this has the result of making it actually very difficult when you need to actually pull backwards. Protraction is the opposite of retraction. Protraction is literally pushing your scapula forwards away from your midline or away from your spine. And you can think of it like a puncher or a boxer throwing a punch. The end of the movement, when it hopefully is connecting with someone and not whiffing air, that's protraction. Now, people sometimes get really stuck in retraction or in sort of a neutral posture because they don't do enough protraction movements. Combat sports that involve a lot of striking usually have a lot of protraction, but wrestling, jiu-jitsu, judo, there's no striking. So oftentimes grappling athletes actually struggle mightily with protraction. Upward rotation of the scapula is the next area that people sometimes find some issues. The dead giveaway that this might be your problem is if you can't get your arms overhead. If you struggle to do an overhead press, or really to do anything that involves your arms going over your head. Downward rotation is the opposite. If you struggle to get your arms downward or in a motion kind of behind your body, or tilting your shoulders forward and you notice pain that way, maybe even if you're shooting in for a takedown but trying to keep your shoulders tight to your body and you find that something is like just sore and out of sorts, that's also a dead giveaway. And though not officially part of one of your scapular movements, either ab or adducting your arms, whether it's overhead or in front of you, like you would if you're going and scooping a single leg, wrapping around someone's body into a gable grip, if those movements give you pain, that's also a problem that could be related to your shoulders. So if you're somebody who has a problem with elevation of your scapula and shoulders, one of the best exercises to help give you that function is the classic shrug. I would start with dumbbells. So what I'm gonna have Bianca do here is pick up these dumbbells, and I'm gonna have her bring her shoulders straight up to her ears, hold there for a second, let them come down slowly, and do that over and over again. So it should look like this. If you can get your shoulders and your traps moving some reasonable distance towards your ears, that would be a good shrug. Now, if you couldn't get it very high, or say that there's a lot of kipping motion in your body, go ahead and put one of these down and hold on to something really stable so that if you were to let go, you'd fall the other way. And when you're doing that, exactly, you can see the tension go to her arm. Now do a shrug on that side. Perfect. If you can do shrugs like this, that's going to make sure that you're using no body English to help get the dumbbell up, basically. So when depression of the scapula is your problem, or if you have issues getting your shoulders down comfortably, a farmer's carry is a great exercise to help train that. Now, one of the reasons the farmer's carry works so well is that gravity is literally pushing against whatever it is that you hold, and it's literally doing the job for you. For that reason, I like kettlebells a little bit more than dumbbells because they're asymmetrically weighted. The weight is all at the bottom, so it's all very concentrated, and all you need to do is think about relaxing your shoulders and gripping them. So I'm gonna have Bianca here pick up these kettlebells, and as she does it, you're gonna see her shoulders and traps are pushing downwards. They're depressing as she holds it. So you're gonna wanna not fight that. You wanna make sure you let your traps relax, grip it hard, brace your core, and start walking. Now, I like to do these on the slower side, so that means don't use weight that's too heavy. Because if you use heavy weight, you're gonna be tempted to trot or start running, almost like you're competing in strongman. That's not what we're going for here. We're going for something real slow, real controlled, and real productive. So if protraction is your issue and you're having trouble getting your arm and shoulders away from your body, you're gonna wanna do an exercise like this. So for this exercise, we're gonna take a lighter dumbbell or a lighter kettlebell. I prefer a kettlebell, holding it around the actual bomb part of the kettlebell itself, laying on the ground with one knee up, almost like you're about to do a Turkish get-up, and you're going to punch the ceiling and pull your shoulder back to the ground. Now there's a few key things when you do this. Number one is you don't want your elbow to bend. Now usually when people struggle with this, when they pull back to the ground, they do things like this. You don't want to do this. You want to have the arm straight the whole time and push up. If you have an elbow brace or something like that, this could be like a good accessory here to make sure you're not cheating it. Now, you can also emphasize that push and hold at the end, but you want to also make sure you can get it back to the ground. Now, a lot of people will use dumbbells that are too heavy for an exercise like that and turn it into like a weird sort of bench pressing motion or a bench press itself. That is definitely not a replacement here. You should never protract in a bench press to begin with. Now, another thing you can do to train your protraction if you're past that more beginner phase is you can use a landmine, and you can do this type of overhead press where you protract at the end, retract, let it come back down. Protract, retract, let it come back down. Now, the nice thing here is if you can't get overhead, you can push your body back and put it out more in front of you. Because you're using the hinge of the landmine, you're not beholden to normal gravity rules with a dumbbell or a kettlebell. You can move around the hinge point to make it more comfortable for you. This might be one of the biggest crossovers to on-the-mat strength. You're always pulling opponents into you. Legs, arms, bodies. Like this exercise, mastering this, mastering retraction and making sure you always have retraction function is going to be one of the most important things for your on-the-mat performance and your shoulder health. A classic cable row or chest supported row is exactly what you want to do. So Bianca here is going to do a cable row, and where she's going to let her shoulders all the way out, retract and pull them back. All the way out, retract and pull them back. And something she's doing that I want to make sure you don't do is I want her to wrap her fingers around, exactly. So Anytime you don't put your thumbs around a grip, you're leaving grip training on the table. You're creating incomplete tension through your wrists, and I'm gonna have to make a video on why your wrist and grip doesn't work, because I'm already doing a shoulder one here for you today. So it should look just like this as she does it, where you let it out, you retract, you pull it back in. This exercise is also great because it's also gonna work on your rear delts. Now your rear delts are a huge part of your shoulder health as well, and there's a huge amount of activation going on there as well. So when you have issues of upward or downward rotation of the scapula, the exercise I like to use is kind of a 2-for-1 special. It hits both parts, both movements, and it's a really good warm-up. You should always do it before practice. You could do it after, before you lift in the weight room. I call them YTIs. People have all kinds of names for it, but the reason I call it a YTI is we're actually gonna have Bianca make that shape with her arms, with these cues in mind. So I'm gonna have her start by coming up to a Y. So here she's upwardly rotating her scapula. She's now gonna make a T with her thumbs up. So bring them a little more towards me. That's something you're gonna see a lot of people do. If someone gets stuck right here, it means they're trying to use their lats too much. Let's get it there. Now wind it behind your body like you're being handcuffed. Now cross your hands like you're gonna be handcuffed, exactly. That's a little downward rotation. So now we're gonna go back in reverse to a T and to an I, or Y, excuse me. And then we're gonna go to a T and to the handcuff, the downward rotation. You can see it right there in her shoulders, in her scapula. And then she's gonna come to a T and then to a Y, which is all the upward rotation, and then relax. It's a lot harder than it looks. It's a great strengthening and mobility exercise, because remember, mobility implies strength. Flexibility implies that's the range that we can move you to. Mobility is a range that you can take yourself through. So one of my favorite ways to train external shoulder rotation only takes a dumbbell and a bench or even the floor. So this is an elbow on the knee, shoulder external rotation. This was taught to me by Charles Poliquin. I don't know anyone who did more work on this particular exercise than him. He deserves all the credit for it. He has a lot of progressions and regressions, but the one that you're gonna wanna start with is right here. So what Bianca's gonna do is she's gonna put her elbow behind her knee, and she's gonna start with the dumbbell all the way at the bottom. And then using the muscles that exist back here, she's gonna unwind and pull back as far as she can, and then let it come down as slow as she can. And make sure you go through the full range of motion. The number one thing people will mess up is that they won't do a complete range of motion. You want it to look like this. And then also at the top, you want to make sure that you're getting past this imaginary line at your shoulder. So the more degrees you can get towards me with this movement, the better. And don't cheat it by bending your wrist. From the defensive aspect of your wrestling, your external rotation of your shoulders is extremely important, especially when it comes to collar ties or opponents trying to use your own arm to get around you. If you can follow without basically feeling like you're gonna submit yourself, if you can follow your opponent around you, you're gonna be much more likely to be able to defend or to be able to pull off some attacks of your own. So when it comes to internal rotation, it can be a little trickier to set up, but one of the easiest ways to do it is with a band. And what I like to do is I like to start with my arm rotating like against my body in such a way that if someone pulled it, I'd probably say uncle or tap out. And I like to kind of find that in range, grab with a band, use a lighter band to start. And then now I'm gonna pull the band this way across my body. So I'm using the internal rotators of my shoulder to pull inwards. And you might have to try different stances, you can cut yourself off more, you can be more perpendicular, you can have it from behind you. But all of these things work, all of the internal rotators. And you can play around with the angle of the band to complete the range of motion in different ways. All will work, and you can set up from anywhere. Now, an honorable mention here is your rear delts. You're gonna notice that a lot of what we went through today are a lot of things that might get at injuries or weaknesses that you have, and sometimes you just wanna get after it. Your rear delts are something you can almost always train no matter what your injury status is. And one of the easiest ways to do them are these next two exercises. And the first one here is doing a chest supported row, but doing it with a wide angle from your elbow to your body. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you how we're gonna do it and the differences. So I'm gonna get these dumbbells here, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna go on a bench or something like this pad here. And instead of rowing with your elbows close to your body, you're gonna bring your elbows away from your body with a wider angle of your arm to your body. Now, when I do that, I'm recruiting a little less lat and I'm using more of my upper back. I'm using more of my traps, I'm using more of my rear delts. These are all things that will help improve your shoulder health. Now, if your tendency is to keep it really close to your body, it means you're probably using a little bit too much of your lats. You're gonna have to go way down in weight here. This was only 20 pounds. You might even have to go less, but don't let your ego get the best of you. The best way to work your rear delts is through opening that angle a little bit and pulling back. Now, another great exercise to work your rear delts is a classic face pull with a cable machine. You can also do this with a band or anything that resembles this motion. But the most important thing to do here is to make sure your elbows stay really high when you pull backwards, just like Bianca's doing. So you get a little external rotation in the shoulder, but you also get a lot of pull through the back of the shoulder there and that upper part of your back. Now, the nice part about face pulls is that, like I said, rear delts are really important. So even if you're a little injured or banged up, you can still work them. So now I want Bianca to do the same thing, but just to have her elbows come a little lower. Now, if you can't get your shoulders elevated or externally rotated as much, you might need to do face pulls like this, where your elbows are coming a little lower. And then for some of you, you might even have to go a lot lower, like that. But what I wouldn't want you to do is to go any lower than this, because at that point, you're just turning it into a lat exercise. Even here, there's way more lats than there were when she pulled it up at its highest. So give this a shot. So everything we've gone through today helps you identify if you have problems with your shoulders and how you might address them before you maybe take on a more advanced shoulder or upper body training program. Now, it's important to remember that these things qualify as the basics, and you're never too good for the basics. So you should always come back and make sure that you're able to evaluate and do all of these different functions of your shoulders and scapula properly. If you ever get to a point where you can't, you should always address it. Today, for example, you might not be able to elevate your shoulders, but 6 months from now, you might have great elevation, great ability to really rip someone's leg off the ground, but now your rotation's not so good. Usually as you solve one problem, it opens up another. One thing that you might want to consider also is when you're at a stage where you feel like you can do all of these things and you have no pain or issues moving through your shoulders in any range of motion, is taking on more advanced programming. There's 2 ways you can do this. One, you can literally look at your physique and determine, my shoulders might be a little bit small, my upper body could stand to grow. If that's the case, you might want to take on a classic hypertrophy program. There's never anything wrong with being strong, and there's never anything wrong with getting a little bit bigger. Now, maybe you're happy with your size. Maybe you're in a weight class where you have nothing left to give and you need to stay exactly where you are. And maybe it becomes a capacity issue. Maybe you feel like your arms and your shoulders are getting a little too tired. At that point, you might want to take on a program that looks like something where you can gain work capacity. We'll address that in future videos, but I want you to think about that. If you feel like in general your shoulders aren't strong enough, take yourself through this battery of tests every other month or every 6 weeks. At that point, something is probably going to stand out as needing to get stronger. If that's not the case, then maybe you should seek out the advice of a professional to help you. But, for example, if everything is going just fine, that might mean that it's time to take on a more advanced program. So as you can see, shoulders are pretty complex. There's a lot of things to consider when you're training them and if you're having problems with them. The number one thing I would hope you would take away from this is that it's a lot less about this and a lot more about everything else going on. So go back to all of the 6 functions of the scapula, plus the 2 honorable mentions. Go back to evaluating your internal, external rotation. And also, make sure you're not neglecting just basic training with weights, cables, etc., etc. Because shoulders are not easy to train, they're even harder to diagnose. So if you're having some trouble, make sure you go see a professional. If you have pain, go to a medical professional. But if you need some help training, consider checking out the Salvo Performance. We have online training programs for people all across the world, and we're located in the heart of New York City and take appointments 7 days a week.